You have 30 seconds to explain how we managed to lose $200 million on a single deal. Richard Blackstone's hand crashed onto the mahogany conference table so hard that the crystal photo frames shivered. On the 40th floor of Blackstone Enterprises, 12 white executives in immaculate Italian suits stared down into their briefcases as if the answers were hidden in the fine leather. Just outside the glass wall, Grace Williams appeared engrossed in sorting papers at the reception desk. At 32, she had worked as the admin assistant on that floor for 7 years, unnoticed by the powerful men who passed her daily as if she were part of the decor. "Mr. Blackstone," began the nervous VP of Finance. Morrison Corporation's proposal exceeded ours in every measurable way. They promised deadlines and profit margins so outrageous we can't even figure out their math. Richard, the heir to a $2 billion construction dynasty, dragged a hand through his steel gray hair. At 58, he'd never faced a collapse this severe. In the past 6 months alone, 5 lucrative contracts had slipped away to the same competitor. Grace pressed her lips together, suppressing the impulse that had been building for months. For years, she'd observed these men repeating the same strategic errors, with bloated estimates and timelines no client would trust. Though she held a summa cum laude MBA from Harvard, a diploma she'd hidden in her desk drawer for 7 years, she recognized every flaw. "How is it even possible," Richard went on, his voice ringing across the room, "that a company formed only 3 years ago is dismantling a 50-year powerhouse?" That's when the reception phone rang. Grace picked it up with her calm, practiced tone. "Blackstone Enterprises, Grace speaking." "Miss Williams," came the smooth voice on the other end. "This is James Morrison from Morrison Corporation. I'd like to speak with Mr. Blackstone regarding an acquisition." Grace felt her pulse speed up. Morrison wasn't satisfied with winning contracts. He wanted to purchase the whole company. Through the glass, she saw Richard gesturing wildly at his team, oblivious that his corporate executioner was waiting on the line 2 steps away. For one charged instant, Grace hesitated. She could just transfer the call and watch the Blackstone empire disintegrate. After all, how many times had Richard walked past her without a nod? How many times had she heard the muttered remarks about support staff knowing their place? But something in Richard's defeated posture, his head bowed for the first time in his charmed existence, sparked a strange compassion in her. Or maybe it was something colder, a realization that this moment of crisis could be the break she'd been waiting for all these years. "Mr. Morrison," she said evenly, "would you mind holding? I'll check Mr. Blackstone's availability." She pressed the hold button and glanced back at the boardroom. Richard now stood at the window, staring at the city he once commanded, unaware that his ruin, or his rescue, rested with the woman he barely noticed. If you're intrigued by this tale of power shifts and quiet revenge, don't forget to subscribe for the rest of the story about how one choice could transform the destiny of a billion-dollar corporation and prove that real capability doesn't depend on wealth or background. Grace let the call wait while she watched Richard gesturing at his executives in frustration. The irony bordered on cruel. The man who once controlled vast resources had no clue that his last hope was 2 steps away, organizing files with the precision of someone who understood the numbers better than any man in the boardroom. "I need answers, not apologies," Richard bellowed, his voice slicing through the glass. "Morrison came out of nowhere and is tearing us apart. How does a company this young draft proposals like sorcery?" Grace exhaled, steadying herself, and pressed transfer. "Mr. Blackstone, James Morrison is on line 2. Richard froze mid-sentence and turned, meeting her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Put him through." He picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Richard, old friend," came Morrison's syrupy voice over speakerphone. "I hope you're coping despite recent troubles. What is it you want, Morrison?" "Straightforward. I respect that. I'm calling to extend a generous offer for Blackstone Enterprises. $300 million. Cash." The silence afterward was suffocating. $300 million, less than 15% of their valuation a year before. "You expect to buy us for pocket change?" Richard asked, barely containing his fury. "Richard, let's be honest. Your firm has lost 5 straight contracts. Your investors are panicking. Your staff are updating resumes. I'm giving you a dignified exit before the situation deteriorates further. Grace clenched her hands. 7 years she'd watched Morrison evolve from a small contractor into their biggest nemesis. 7 years studying the patterns of his victories, somehow always beating Blackstone's bids by uncanny margins and promising timelines that suggested inside knowledge. One question, Morrison. Richard's voice was low. How do you arrive at such precise margins? How do you know exactly which materials to choose and when? Morrison's chuckle was pure condescension. That's called skill, Richard. Something your team has been lacking for a while. Perhaps it's time to accept not everyone is meant for this business. At that instant, Grace made her decision. She stood, stepped into the conference room, and tapped the glass door. 12 pairs of eyes fixed on her, startled and dismissive. "Mr. Blackstone," she said softly, "may I speak a moment?" Richard covered the receiver. "Grace, this is not a good time, I know. It's about Morrison and why he keeps winning." Richard's irritation shifted to something sharper. "You have information?" Grace met his gaze, her eyes steady with a confidence he had never bothered to notice. "Mr. Blackstone, respectfully, I know exactly why Morrison keeps beating you. And I know why you're losing." Morrison was surely listening on the line, catching every word. "Richard, who the hell is this?" Richard studied her expression. For the first time in 7 years, he looked at her, not as background, but as someone with knowledge he desperately needed. "Morrison, I'll call you back." "Richard, don't be a fool. This offer won't last." "Then I hope it expires slowly." Richard hung up, turning to face Grace. "You have 5 minutes. Convince me." Grace stepped to the table, ignoring the skeptical glances. She flipped to the cost summary in the last proposal. "You budgeted concrete at $85 a cubic meter." She tapped the figure. "Morrison bid 62. You assumed he'd eat the loss, correct?" Obviously, the CFO said, "No one gets quality concrete that cheap." Grace flipped a few more pages. Except he didn't specify premium imported concrete. He used domestic grade B with additives, same strength, half the cost. Legal and fully compliant. The room went silent. Richard leaned over. "How do you know this?" "Because I've reviewed every proposal for 7 years, and because I have a Harvard MBA you never asked about." The look on the executives' faces was almost comical if it weren't so telling. For 7 years they'd passed her without a thought, unaware the woman sorting their files knew as much about procurement as they did. Maybe more. "You have a business degree?" Richard asked, incredulous. "Summa cum laude, specialization in project management and cost analysis." The words landed like a grenade. One of the older executives, Patterson, leaned in. "Why would a Harvard grad be an admin assistant?" Grace didn't look away. "Because 7 years ago, after graduation, I got 132 rejection letters. Everyone polite, professional, all claiming I wasn't a cultural fit. Imagine that." Her voice dripped with acid. Richard understood. A young black woman with perfect credentials denied by companies that hired less qualified white men. "So I took this job to keep the lights on. And over the years, watching you repeat the same missteps Morrison avoided, I started to think maybe it wasn't me who was unqualified." Richard absorbed every word. "Continue. Morrison isn't smarter, he's just studied you. You always insist on premium materials when cheaper equivalents work. You always overestimate timelines. You assume you're the only competent option." Grace retrieved another folder. "While you do this, Morrison examines your old bids, detects your habits, and offers simpler solutions." "That's absurd," Patterson blurted. "Our bids are confidential." Grace stared at him, pity in her eyes. "Mr. Patterson, you've outsourced printing to Top Print for years. The owner's brother is a Morrison Corp partner. You really think your proposals were secret?" The room fell into stunned quiet. In 5 minutes, Grace had pinpointed both the leaks and the cause of their losing streak. Richard regarded her with a mix of awe and regret. For 7 years, he'd had the solution right in front of him, and never looked. "Grace," he began, voice low, "can you help us fight back?" Grace paused. She could say no, walk out and watch the company collapse from arrogance, sweet revenge after years of invisibility. But when she met Richard's eyes, she saw something unexpected, not just desperation, but overdue recognition. "I can," she said at last, "but not as your assistant, and not for $28,000 a year." Richard nodded. "What do you want?" Grace's smile wasn't the polite one she'd worn to survive. It was the smile of a woman who'd waited a long time to be seen. "I want you to learn the most qualified person isn't always who you expect, and the chance to prove 7 years of observing your mistakes has taught me exactly how to fix them. If you've ever been overlooked, you understand the quiet power in watching everyone underestimate you." 48 hours after her revelation, Grace sat in the CFO's Italian leather chair, fired, replaced by her, and faced an impossible task. "So our special consultant," Patterson sneered, spitting out the title, "how exactly will you solve what 6 months of experts couldn't?" Grace didn't glance up from the spreadsheets. "First, Mr. Patterson, you can drop that tone. Second, your experts made mistakes a first-year student would catch." Silence fell like a curtain. In 1 week, she had transformed from invisible to irreplaceable, though hostility simmered, especially among Patterson and other senior staff threatened by her rise. Patterson turned to Richard. "Are you sure this is wise? She may have a Harvard diploma, but real work isn't academia." Grace finally raised her gaze, and Patterson shifted uncomfortably under her stare. "Mr. Patterson, you're partly right. Experience matters, which is why I spent 2 days infiltrating Top Print's systems." Another bomb detonated. Richard sat forward. "You did what?" "Technically, it wasn't hacking," Grace said with a cool smile. "Basic social engineering. I called posing as an auditor. 20 minutes later, I had all their records." She connected her laptop to the projector. "Here are our bids from the last 18 months. She clicked another folder. "And here are the files accessed from Morrison's terminals, always 24 to 48 hours before submission." Patterson paled. "That's industrial espionage." Grace's voice sharpened. "Not only espionage, it's far worse. Look at the timestamps." She gestured toward a row of dates displayed on the monitor. "Morrison wasn't just reading our proposals. He was editing key technical details in the originals." Richard pushed himself out of his chair. "Editing what exactly? Swapping material codes for cheaper substitutes still within spec? Adjusting the schedules to sneak in delays, inflating certain costs in targeted sections? By the time we sent our bids, they already carried hidden traps Morrison knew how to exploit perfectly." The impact of her words struck like a hammer. Morrison hadn't merely spied, he had deliberately undermined Blackstone's bids from the inside. "How can that be?" Richard asked, his voice raw. Grace drew a steadying breath, then spoke in a level tone that left no doubt. "Because Morrison has someone working for him inside this company, someone with clearance to access the final drafts before printing." A heavy silence swallowed the room. Every eye flicked around, suspicion spreading like poison. "Are you absolutely certain?" Richard's voice dropped. "I'm not guessing. I have evidence." Grace opened another window. "This is the access log for the Regional Medical Center bid. 3 users opened the final file. You, Mr. Blackstone, myself to prepare it for print." And she paused, meeting each gaze. "Someone logged in as Mr. Patterson at 2 a.m., the night before submission." Patterson lurched to his feet. "This is slander. I never— How dare you accuse me? 15 years of service." "Exactly," Grace replied, voice calm as glass. 15 years. Long enough to grow bitter. Long enough to see your bonuses shrink when we lost contracts." "Richard, don't listen to this," Patterson sputtered. "This is insane. This—" Grace cut in, her eyes glacial. "Mr. Patterson, you're repeating Morrison's mistake. Assuming that because I'm a black woman who organized your files, I couldn't be the one to uncover the truth. Tell me, how do you explain the $50,000 deposited into your personal account after each lost bid, always from a shell company linked to Morrison's headquarters?" Patterson staggered back as if struck, his face drained of color. I can explain." "You don't have to," Grace said evenly, "because I've already reported everything to the FBI. They'll be here within the hour to arrest you for industrial espionage and fraud." He collapsed into his chair, confession tumbling out in choked words. Years of resentment, Morrison's approach, the payments that began as help then grew, the debts from his divorce and gambling. A man who had cultivated a reputation for unimpeachable ethics revealed as a traitor willing to ruin the firm that paid him. As security led him away, Richard turned to Grace. equal parts horrified and awed. In 3 days, you identified the leaks, gathered evidence for federal charges, and exposed a traitor who sat among us for years. What else are you hiding? Grace leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of quiet triumph. Mr. Blackstone, 7 years in this office taught me more than any degree ever could. I've learned that men like Patterson fear me not because I'm unqualified, but because I'm too qualified to remain invisible. She opened a fresh folder on her laptop. And now that the mole is gone, I can focus on the next phase, dismantling Morrison Corporation with their own methods. Richard straightened slowly. What exactly are you planning? Morrison believes he's identified every weakness because he spent 18 months studying our contracts. But there's something he doesn't suspect. Grace's smile sharpened. I've been studying his bids for just as long, and I've found patterns that will expose his tactics, and something else that will destroy him permanently. What patterns? She closed her laptop deliberately. The kind that will make your next meeting with Morrison the final one of his career. At that moment, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at it, her expression turning almost predatory. Mr. Blackstone, things just got interesting. Morrison just requested an urgent meeting to renegotiate the acquisition. Looks like Patterson's arrest reached him faster than we thought. He wants to accelerate the sale because he believes we're defenseless without our insider. No, Grace said, shaking her head. He wants to move quickly because he doesn't realize Patterson wasn't our weakness. He was his. Richard watched as she organized her folders with methodical precision. Grace, I have to ask you something. If you were capable of all this, why did you spend 7 years quietly arranging my files without saying a word? Grace paused, meeting his gaze directly. Because, Mr. Blackstone, sometimes the strongest position is the one nobody notices. For 7 years, I was invisible to you, and invisible people see everything, hear everything, and no one suspects them. She stood, picking up a slim folder. And now, that invisibility is the most dangerous weapon Morrison will ever face. Because like you, he assumed competence had a particular face. As she closed her briefcase, Grace allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection. 7 years ago, 132 companies said she wasn't the right cultural fit. Now that same dismissal was about to save an empire and destroy the rival who thought she was irrelevant. Morrison scheduled the meeting for 9 a.m. tomorrow, she said, checking her phone again. That's enough time to prepare the presentation that will end this war for good. Richard nodded gravely, yet something in her manner unsettled him. You seem remarkably calm for someone who just uncovered a traitor. Grace gave him a small, measured smile, and this time he realized he might never have known her at all. Mr. Blackstone, I should probably confess something. I've suspected Patterson for over 2 years. 2 years and you kept silent? Because no one ever asked my opinion. And because some reckonings, she paused, her eyes burning with conviction, must be timed perfectly for maximum impact. As Grace finalized her plans for the showdown with Morrison, one thought hung in the air. If she'd quietly laid the groundwork for 2 years to expose a mole, what other secrets might she be holding back for the right moment? The next morning, Morrison strode into Blackstone Enterprises with 2 lawyers and an accountant, clearly prepared to finalize the purchase of a failing firm. His confident smirk froze when he saw Grace seated beside Richard, her files arrayed in perfect order. Mr. Blackstone, Morrison began, ignoring her. I assume you've reconsidered, especially given recent developments? Yes, Morrison, Richard said evenly. They've been very educational. Grace, would you begin? She nodded and opened the first document. Mr. Morrison, before we discuss any sale, I'd like to clarify some issues with your business practices. Morrison's jaw tightened as he finally looked at her. And you are? Grace Williams, Director of Strategic Operations. And you, Mr. Morrison, are about to discover what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. She connected her laptop to the projector. The first slide showed transaction records. Here are the payments your company funneled to Patterson over 18 months. $50,000 for every leak. Morrison's face stayed carefully blank, but his attorneys shifted uncomfortably. And that's only the start, Grace continued, advancing the slide. These are the file modifications you made with Patterson's help. Industrial sabotage, documented and time-stamped. You can't prove any of this, Morrison snapped, though his voice betrayed strain. Grace's smile never wavered. I can, and I will. Because while you were exploiting our trust, I was monitoring yours. She brought up another file. Recognize this email? From your personal account to Patterson, listing exactly what you needed before each bid. Morrison blanched. Where did you get that? The same way you got ours, only I'm better. Grace navigated to a final folder. 3 months ago, when you breached our system, I watched you. And while you were gathering data, I was gathering yours. The realization struck Morrison visibly. He had been under surveillance the entire time. Here's my favorite, she said, playing an audio clip. Morrison's voice filled the room. Those idiots are so predictable. With Patterson feeding us, we can underbid them every time. It's almost unfair. Morrison surged to his feet. This is entrapment. No, Grace corrected softly. This is accountability. For 18 months, you sabotaged contracts and tried to bankrupt a legacy. You believed no one would challenge you. She opened one final folder. But what you didn't know is that during those same 18 months, you lost 3 contracts you never suspected were rigged with false data. Want to know why? Morrison's silence was answer enough. Because your illegal tactics became your only tactics, and without them, your mediocrity was exposed. Grace stood, closing the folder with quiet finality. The FBI will be visiting your headquarters within the hour. Industrial espionage, fraud, data theft. Patterson has confessed in full. Morrison was trembling now. What do you want? Richard met his gaze coolly. Justice. Grace, show him the last item. Grace's expression was calm, almost pitying. While you sabotaged us, I planted doctored specs in the files Patterson stole. You sabotaged yourself without realizing it. Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. You've destroyed your own company. A stunned hush fell over the conference room. Morrison finally understood the trap he'd walked into. Grace, Richard said softly, awe in his voice. How did you orchestrate all this? 7 years of observation, Mr. Blackstone, she said simply. I learned that true intelligence isn't about appearing smart. It's about letting arrogant people think they're smarter. 6 months later, Grace sat in her new corner office on the 42nd floor, now executive vice president and owner of a 20% stake in Blackstone Enterprises, a role created for her after she saved the company and expanded it into 3 states. Morrison was serving 8 years in prison, his firm dissolved, his reputation in ruins. Grace, Richard said, entering with a contract. We've just signed the biggest deal in our history, $500 million. She smiled, gazing out of the skyline she now saw from a place of authority. Funny how everything changes when you let results, not prejudice, define people. Richard looked down, visibly ashamed. Grace, I owe you an apology for those years No, you don't, she said gently. Those years taught me something precious. Sometimes the greatest advantage is being overlooked. That afternoon, Harvard called to invite her to speak on leadership. The woman once rejected by 132 companies was now teaching others how to lead. The best revenge, she told young professionals, isn't to tear down your doubters. It's to build something so strong that no one can ever deny your worth again. Morrison tried to cripple a business by targeting its flaws. Grace saved it by uncovering its hidden strengths, beginning with the truth that talent comes in every color, every background, every face. If this story inspired you, subscribe for more proof that real competence always rises, no matter how the world tries to keep it invisible. Leave your experiences in the comments and subscribe for more stories proving that genuine talent always overcomes empty privilege.